Welcome, everyone, to the Builder, Buyer, or Both webinar with Fullcast and Go-to-Market Council. My name is Amy Cook. I am the Chief Marketing Officer and co-founder at Fullcast, and it is such a pleasure to have with me today the leads of Go-to-Market Council who do everything as well, Andy Mowat and Noah Marks. How are you guys?
No, we're great. It's great to be here. I've loved collaborating on this survey. I feel like between the Fullcast network and the folks that Noah and I collaborate with, it's just been great to get the data. I think Amy, you and I have been digging through the data for some time, and Noah too. So it's exciting to talk about this today.
Absolutely right. Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
I'm excited to introduce you guys. Noah, I hear you're in the Netherlands. We just were talking about.
That's right. I'm in the Netherlands this week. It's bright and sunny, just as you would imagine.
That's wonderful. I love it. Well, we've done a little bit of an introduction, but just to get to know you guys a little better before we start on this survey data, um, Andy, can you just give us a little bit about your background?
yeah. I think like a lot of folks, kind of fallen into RevOps and then running it for unicorns, Upwork, Box, Culture Amp, and most recently Carta. Noah and I, 10 years ago, when I was at Box and he was at Okta, started collaborating with our teams and just bringing our teams together to help learning. And the GTM Council has kind of come out of that, which is the top 140 RevOps leaders thinking about AI and GTM. And then I love connecting people. So Whispered is all about where you go to find your next unposted role.
I love it. Noah, how about you?
Yeah, so yeah, no, absolutely. Andy gave the background on how we met. We both got into ops about 15 years ago and been close pretty much since then. And I've just been working at a lot of pre-IPO to IPO companies, and then most recently some larger private equity-backed organizations, and just recently joined ECI Solutions, which is a vertical SaaS player in the manufacturing and residential home construction. And field service industries. So I'm excited to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much also for doing this with me. Let's just get into the survey and just start talking about it. I love it. So, Andy, Noah, and I got together and said, you know what, there's so much change in the market. We need to have some real data to look at because as RevOps people, we all love data and want to make decisions with our data. And so we decided to survey senior leaders in revenue operations mostly, but senior revenue leaders, and help understand the market in terms of, are we building with an LLM, with Claude? Are we buying software? And how is AI really disrupting everything? So the people that we surveyed were roughly just a little bit under 100 senior RevOps leaders. The company size was 30% were 1,000 to 5,000 employees. 17 of them were 200 to 500. 14 were 500 to 1,000. Less than 200 were 13. Nine were 10,000 plus, and then there were five other entries. So I think a total of 82. In terms of job roles, we had 64% in RevOps with a smattering of others, and 97% director level or above. So we feel like we got a really good cross section of company sizes in the revenue operations decision maker role. Anything else you guys want to talk about there?
I mean, I guess Noah and I every week get to deep dive with either an operator that's building slash op buying or a vendor that's trying to sell to them. And I think the one meta topic that just kept coming up was this buy versus build, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like there's really interesting, which we didn't maybe survey as much, but I've been asking a lot on. There's a lot of pressure
Mhm.
from there's like to me there are four reasons why people are feeling the pressure to build over buy or feeling like an urgency there. I'd say number one is tokens. People don't really
Mhm.
charge, they don't really expense them anymore. So all of a sudden, like a large portion of it is free. I think there's a lot of financial pressure from CFOs to like, hey, do you really need that tool? I think
Mhm.
security is one. And then like
Mhm.
LLMs have made it a hell of a lot easier to build things that look good. And so I think everybody in RevOps is feeling both pressure from above, but also pressure from themselves of like, could I build this? And then
Yeah.
there's a different question of should you build it as well too.
Absolutely. Noah, any other comments on this?
Yeah. So I think one of the challenges we've had over the last decade, and Andy and I have collaborated a lot on this conversation, but it's very true across the council, is that for a long period of time, we felt that technology was holding us back, or that our ideas were innovating faster than the tech stack could keep up.
Mhm.
And so there's also this presents this opportunity where now we can supplement what we can provide, what we can receive from a vendor, and we can supplement it with our own personalized capabilities. And so it also creates this outside of the pressure from CEOs and board members, which is a very real thing, to adopt and instill AI across the business. It also creates this or taps into this creativity aspect of our role and what could we do if we had the opportunity. So it's there's both pressure from above, but also pressure internally, as Andy mentioned, for can we tap into those possibilities?
Absolutely. And it's a very exciting time because I feel the same way, in a marketing and sometimes RevOps role when I work with clients, is that, I can build a web page now with Claude that looks beautiful. I've never been able to do that before. And yes, it's a wireframe. And yes, I give it to my web developer, but it'll, cut out 80% of the time to build.
Mhm.
And so those kinds of possibilities for creativity are fascinating and really exciting. All right, here, let's get into the survey now. So our first finding, guys, was that RevOps still leans by overbuild. We hear about the cloud cowboys, right? And we hear about people who are trying to build a forecasting system overnight with tokens. But when it comes to leaning buy versus build, what we found was that over half said it really just depends on the use case. 38% lean toward buying, 11% lean toward building. Noah, you first. What's your response to this?
I think that's spot on. I think there's an idea around what can we buy as an infrastructure that isn't unique. And I think what people found when they did a lot of vibe coding was that everybody was kind of creating a lot of the same stuff. And so then you take a
Mhm.
step back and you say, is this something that's really critical and is creating a competitive advantage for me? Is this something I want to maintain and think about? And for me, I mean, I've known the Fullcast team for maybe more than a decade now. And what the thing for that is you want to find a partner who's thinking about things more than you and driving and innovating so that you don't have to. So this is where you really got to pick your poison, if that's the right terminology. But really the things that are focusing on the stuff that's going to matter, that's specific to your business versus leveraging the best practices that somebody else has already created. And so oftentimes you want to lean towards the buy decision, but then you do need that build to capture that remaining 20-30% that is unique to you, that's going to drive the way that your business is tailored. But I think from Andy and my perspective, so many companies are so similar and so many companies are facing the same challenges that not everybody's unique and not every organization is that unique. There's a lot of similarities, and so finding where those places overlap, where you can take advantage of a partner to step in and help, and the areas that you think that actually could be a competitive advantage for you. I think that's ultimately the decision. So no surprise that you want to buy something, but I think it's whether or not you find something that actually matches what you need.
I,
I
I
love
would
that.
just plus one to know. I think Noah and I and pretty much everyone in GTM Council are aligned. Like a lot of people are oversteering towards building, and they're going to build a lot of junk. And I think really you should consider that. I think this chart does show why this topic is so important because 2 years ago, buy build would have been barely possible without the LLMs and everything like that. And so I
Right.
hear from every vendor, like I always ask people, who's your biggest competitor? And in almost every case right now, it's build versus some other competitor out there. And a lot of deals are stalling because of this. And so I think this chart does show that, like, in 62% of the cases, the company may not go by anybody, which is something we've talked a lot about, Amy. It's funny, too, because you look at what Fullcast does. There's a slide later on that talks about specifically what are people building and, the commissions, are one that I think people would be crazy to build. And there was actually a full fun thing on one of my posts the other week where we posted that slide that we'll show in a couple minutes, and people like, you got to be kidding me, you would build this stuff. And so I do think this slide encapsulates the whole topic of this webinar, which is fun. So
Yeah, I think so too. I think, it really depends. And as we go through these slides, we're going to talk about our perspective on when to choose build and when to choose buy.
Yeah.
All right. The next one, governance. One of my favorite phrases is from Prasad Varabatla, who runs Cisco's RevOps, and he said that the future is governed innovation. And I think that this slide really speaks to that. As you can see, 62% of large companies, what we're calling 5,000 plus employees, have a formal or developing governance structure. Even up from companies like 1,000 to 5,000. I found that difference so important because you can see that is a very interesting line. Like, the companies that have less than 200 employees on this survey are higher in terms of the formal or in development governance structure, even more so than the 1,000 to 5,000. But then when it gets to 5,000 plus, you're like, it just must be done. So, Andy, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think the reality is most people are winging it still. I think bigger companies are starting to, but this is a classic example of where the senior leadership doesn't really understand these issues, which is why you and Noah and I are combining to really write the report to help like senior leaders think about this stuff. I think there's this naive pressure, which is AI is here, just you can build it now. And so I think what we're really trying in our report and our study and some of the other work that we're collaborating on is helping people think about it. And you should have a framework and you should have an approach, which we'll get into later. But I think the reality right now is people are winging it. They aren't aligned between the RevOps team, the IT team, and the senior leadership on what their approach is. And that slows everything down. And speed is critical to be able to execute. Like, think about it this way. It's like if you're building something, Amy, on your side, you can add a new tool, you can add new vendor, you can add new something like in minutes. But here, like no one else sit there and be like, oh man, it's going to take me 6 months to get through security. Or like imagine if you build something and it's not SOC 2 compliant. And so I think this just highlights what a mess this is right now because we're all learning so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Noah, how about you?
Yeah. Well, it's a stark contrast. And for anybody in sales, if you've ever sold to the enterprise, it's actually a pleasure after you've sold to maybe what's in that mid market, which is that
Mhm.
that awkward teenage, years, which you're a bigger company, you have more complexity, but you still, like Andy said, you still don't have your shit together, and there's still all this complexity and bureaucracy, and the governance isn't really something that's necessarily funded or thought through. And I think what's interesting that you pointed out is at the very beginning that the companies that are now emerging are thinking about governance early and they're starting to incorporate that into their way of life. And I think it's much harder for the companies that are already a little bit more established, but maybe don't have the resources to really focus on this. But if anything, hopefully this is a comforting slide to most people to understand that you're not alone, that most companies are having the same challenges as you, except for the very large ones. And so this is something that it's obviously very important to think through. I think it's going to largely fall along the shoulders of the ops organizations to really take a lead in this world, but there isn't a defined best practice yet, and I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Oh, I love that. I think that it is comforting to know that we're all in this together and that we all know we need to get there and we can help each other. All right, this is very interesting when it comes to data layers. So we asked two different questions. Do you have the data layer to build AI applications on top of? And what's missing from your data layer? So we can see here that over half have a partial data layer. But what's missing from the data layer is governance, a unified semantic layer, a single source of truth, fragmentation across systems people mentioned. And this was in an open response question. So we just did a cluster analysis and pulled them together. Completeness, depth, and quality, and LLM-ready context and vectorized data. Andy, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, in the last 3 months, I think I've heard from probably 50 people, which and a lot of vendors are popping up. And I think the fundamental thought here is if you connect an LLM directly to your systems of record, and you ask it a question, right? So say, tell me all of the one deals I've done. It may interpret that differently different times. And
Mm,
so there's this whole missing layer that I think is everyone's starting to realize, which is I need that unified semantic layer, right? So
mm,
what is closed? What is a one deal for us, right? It may be, and I don't want the LLM interpreting that. I want that there. What is if I've said something one time that's there. Somebody gave the example the other day. It's just like if you hop on a call and you're like, "Hey, we're trying to pull this report in." Bob from RevOps says, "No, you need the CW close loss one field. You're pulling the wrong field."
mhm.
That's what effectively I would define as the semantic layer. I think that everybody that's you build, you make mistakes. It's hard to realize it the first time, right? It's really easy to build something that looks really good, like, hey, here's this cool tool, it answers the question, but it may be making stuff up. And so the really sophisticated people are getting that data layer. I think the other, and we didn't separate out in this question, but there's two really parts, which is like, do you have accurate data? And then do you have it like the semantic layer set up. And so I think we kind of merged it. I would have probably split it. I think every RevOps person knows their data will never be great. And we're always fighting that battle and you'll never be perfect. But I think it's been clear that to do this right at scale, you need a data layer.
Love it.
Yeah, yeah. There's an element where I think all senior ops leaders over the last couple of years have felt the pressure, and I think the pressure from above to build AI, become an AI company, because that's what the board's pushing. And the reality is, AI is not magic. AI doesn't solve all the sins of your company, and ultimately, it's that foundation layer that is going to drive your success. And you can't skip it. It's the hard work. It's the stuff that any ops person, when you first join an organization, you have to dig in and fix and get into the right spot. Otherwise, everything else crumbles above it. And so
Absolutely.
I mean, it's no surprise at all, but certainly this is one where I think this is where maybe a lot of organizations have taken a step back and realized that, maybe they took a lot of missteps and they tried, automated self-service for the customers, and that failed miserably because the data was really bad. And
Yep.
so now, okay, what do we need to do? What do we learn from that? And so I think this is kind of the version 2 era of understanding now what is it really going to take to make AI successful. It isn't just an easy button that you push and it magically makes you successful.
Yeah, that garbage in, garbage out aphorism really applies here, right? If you don't have the data, you're not going to have good analysis of your data. And I loved your comment about AI is not magic. I say that all the time because that's the first thing that even our clients or even our internal, some of our internal executives will be like, well, can't you just AI that? And it's a good question to ask because it does force us as operators to think about, can I do this with AI? More often than not, the answer is no, because it's a fundamental infrastructure issue or something like that. But that AI magic is permeating across all of business, saying, "Hey, can't we just AI this?"
I think it's also an important point for a CEO or somebody like that. When you see somebody build something cool, it may not actually have like a solid data foundation on it. And so sometimes you'll see the random person will code something up, put it in the channel. CEO will want to be like, that's awesome, Bobby. Great job. Everyone do like Bobby. But like though, and we'll talk probably more about this later, but I think Kyle Norton, who you respect, Amy, and I do, and I think Noah does too, he talks a lot about the returns on centralized execution of AI GTM efforts are going to be a lot higher than giving everybody Claude code and turning them loose, right? Because then they'll just query directly to the systems of record.
Absolutely. So I want to say one last thing before we go to the next slide, and that is my background is academics, right? And what academics will teach you when you go into your PhD program is you have to look at every little teeny tiny piece of data. Otherwise, your output's going to be wrong.
Mhm.
And so I think that applies more now in business than anywhere, where if you do not have a strong RevOps leader who is willing to get into the details, who is willing to analyze every little teeny tiny piece of data to make sure that the inputs are great for the outputs, and that the data is solid so we can actually do analysis on it, your analysis is going to be wrong. And like you were just saying, Andy, it can look shiny and nice, and you can have a completely wrong conclusion because you did not inspect your data before you did it. And that is so, like, for example, if you're only doing your forecasting based on your CRM and your CRM is crappy, then you've got a big problem. So if you're doing a good forecasting job, you're going to pull in your call intelligence, you're going to pull in your unstructured data, and you're going to pull in your CRM that hopefully is clean enough so you can actually have a very good picture of what your forecast might be.
I think everything you said, plus one to it. The one thing I'd add that is the cost. Everyone's starting to think about the cost of this stuff. If you were to do your forecasting directly on top of your call data, it's going to be really expensive. But if you've structured it correctly with the right data and all the right and vectorized and all that, it'll know where to go, right? So I've heard people will burn tons of credits by just saying, hey, go review every call and answer this question for me. And so that's where vendors that have really thought it through and structured it and built it right, or DIYing that layer, is really important.
Yeah, 100%.
There's one other component to this actually, which I think is interesting, which I think a lot of ops people are very skeptical of data. And while you spent your time in academia, Andy and I were tooling around in some investment banking worlds. And I think for myself, opposite ends of the spectrum. But for myself, one of the things I took away from that experience was that, you don't build a model to find an answer. Most people start with an answer and they look for a model to defend it. And so the challenge with the formula your data is that if you don't trust your data, how can you in any possible way trust the output? And so for us to go on a ledge and back any of the recommendations that we have, you really have to understand how it got to that conclusion and be able to go back and check it. And if you can't, you're really out there on a ledge with a presumption that could be absolutely false or could take you in the wrong direction, even with the best intentions. And so I think that ability there just outlines how important and what information you're using. And again, Andy mentioned earlier, the semantic layer that translates all that information correctly is so important. And it gives you some confidence that what you're looking at and what you are pursuing is the right direction.
Oh, I love that so much. That's the age-old question of like, am I using the data to really find out what's true or to defend my already previously decided opinion? And if there's in the book, The RevOps Advantage, that our CEO Ryan Westwood, our CTO Bala Bhaskaran, and I wrote last year, there is a scientific method for RevOps data, if anybody on this call would like to take a look at it, to help prevent exactly what you're talking about, Noah. Okay, next slide. All right, the ownership is clear until AI enters the picture. I love this slide because you can see, RevOps owns rep productivity, data enrichment, starting to, have more, IT has a little bit more influence over go-to-market systems. IT has a lot more influence along with product over data tooling. And when it comes to AI agents, everybody's experimenting. That's fascinating to me. Noah, do you want to go first? What's your thought on this?
I think this is the result of the mandate that everybody needs to vibe code and everybody needs to dig in and learn AI. And so it's just this very disparate and distributed chaos that's occurring across companies. And it is creating some very interesting observations or some insights that are coming around, but it does create the chaos and everybody's having, do you have an AI expert in every team? Do you have a centralized organization? And because it just became organic under a mandate that just go do AI, it's people just all took it on without any sort of understanding or guidance of maybe what's the best practice there. So I think some organizations are understanding it a little bit faster and are failing or are learning from those potential failures faster. But this just kind of goes to the fact that along with the governance, AI is everywhere, and this is a decision that I think people need to get to within the next 6 to 9 months. to make sure that whatever you are building, it's going to be something that is sustainable and something that isn't going to be a short-term, flame out scenario for you.
I love that. Andy?
So first, I love Caroline's visualization better than mine. This is really good. I spent about an hour on this data because I really wanted to think through like what was my approach to it, and I kind of came up with four things. One is, do not split GTM engineering and RevOps. They both basically have the same charge, right? So it's like use data systems and AI to make teams better. So whenever someone splits that out, it just creates a mess because they're both still using the systems. Second one is like I would not split GTM systems and RevOps. I know as companies get to a certain maturity, they sometimes will, but what that ends up meaning is everything goes slower, and speed is of critical essence right here. I think the third thing is I don't necessarily believe that RevOps should own the data layer because generally what you'll see is product is more sophisticated than RevOps on the data side. But I think what you do need to do is make sure that RevOps slash GTM is an equal customer slash has an equal voice and an equal call on resources for data because oftentimes they're second fiddle or third fiddle. And then I think the final one is you can see how AI agents is owned by everybody. I think you're going to want the agents being executed in GTM within GTM, but I do think there is value. Some of the most forward-leaning companies that Noah and I have talked to have like a central company-wide like AI infrastructure, which is we're going to make sure everyone has the same stuff. And
Yeah.
so I think this slide create unify as much as you can, but there's some things where you may have to accept that like there's an entire company-wide approach to this.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, we have a few more slides and we're already at the half an hour mark because this conversation has been like absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to cruise through a couple of these fairly quickly so we can have some time for any other discussion points at the end.
Go for it.
All right, here is everyone's experimenting and few have scaled. So this is very interesting for me. There's a lot of broad adoption with dashboard and analytics on the with AI. Same with data enrichment. Same with agents. When you get down to forecasting, there's not broad adoption across that, but a lot of people are experimenting with that. I'm going to move on to the next one because there are some very good similarities here. The next one here, I want to get your opinion on is AI fluency stops at the sales floor. So you can see here in engineering, 38% self-identify as experts in AI, 44% identify as fluent, and 17% identify as somewhat fluent. On the other side of the spectrum, 25% of sales reps say they are not fluent in AI. 59% say they're somewhat, 12% say they are, and only a teeny tiny portion say that their sales reps are experts. So, Noah, thoughts on this?
I do want to caveat this that the folks that were surveyed in this, I think, are some of the more forward-thinking ops leaders, and so I'm not. I think this is representative of their organizations and the teams and that they work with. I think this might overstate the expertise on the broader scale that we have, but I'm not surprised, and I'm not necessarily. I don't think this is a challenge. I think certainly on the engineering side, this is where AI is having a lot of traction in development. And oftentimes what Andy was talking about, having a centralized company-wide AI team, oftentimes sitting in the engineering world. But then beyond there, I think it's really from the go-to-market, at least, I don't necessarily know how much I need or care if the sales org is really driving and leaning into AI. Fundamentally, I would just love it if they're driving to a process and really thinking through what the customer needs, and certainly as collaboration partners for what we want to build out. I think that's great. Definitely working with the ops team, but I think this might even overstate some of the broader the broader landscape, just because these are very innovative B2B organizations for the most part that are
Yeah, I
represented.
love it. I think this is probably directionally correct, but I often wonder what if we were interviewing sales reps instead of RevOps uh, teams, if the
Right.
sales reps fluency would be much higher and the engineering would be lower. So keep
I
that
had the
in
same one.
mind.
Yeah, it's you got to
No
remember that
perspective.
we were only asking one of these columns about the other columns.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. That's right. Okay. Next, small teams stall deals to build with AI. Andy, I want your perspective on this in particular. This question was very interesting, and it's good for all of us software companies that are experiencing this in the market. Have you postponed a software purchase in the last 6 months because you believe you can build it faster with AI? This is by company size, and you can see this self-report data that even in the large companies, they're saying that in the last 6 months, they've occasionally stalled a deal. 46%, 8% say that they frequently stall a deal. Now, on the less than 200 side, I mean, this is, it's very intuitive that on the smaller companies, they're going to stall these deals more often just to see if they can do it cheaper or better. Andy, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is the reality of the market, kind of that first slide that we talked about this is another kind of perspective on that same thing, which is companies are not your biggest competitor is now, if you're selling software, your biggest competitor is now building in-house. I think the key point here is building it faster with AI, right? Because internally, you're going to have to go through security reviews to bring on a new vendor. You're going to have to implement. And so I think everyone's weighing that, which is where can I get to faster with the right solutions? So yeah, to me, this is why we're talking today and why it's become like the number one topic in software. For sure.
Absolutely. Noah, thoughts on this?
I am going to I'm going to blame some of the vendors
Hmm.
for this metric. So Annie and I spend a lot of time talking with CEOs and founders of a lot of the emerging AI startups, and I think one of the challenge that a lot of them have is in their pitch. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of it comes down to a lot of the messaging that we're hearing is too ambiguous. It's a little vague. And
Mhm.
from my perspective, the vague pitches get prototyped. Those are the
Mm,
things that organizations say, wow, it kind of sounds like something maybe I do. I don't really understand necessarily why I'd want to partner with you to
mm,
deliver this capability. And so for me, I think the vague pitches get prototyped and the sharp pitches get bought. And so my advice to all the vendors out there, the companies out there, is really understand your messaging. What are the key pain points that your ICP is experiencing? And really having your conviction and understanding of how your solution delivers on that in a very crisp manner. And I think that's where a lot of the organizations are not helping themselves because if it's not clear, I'm going to get a little bit hesitant about engaging with you. And maybe I'm just going to try to build it myself because I don't understand what your value proposition is over something that maybe I can build.
oh, I love that. Really
Yeah,
good.
be clear what you do. I mean, how many times do vendors show up and say, yeah, so you can do anything with it, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the,
Yeah.
no, I need you to be really clear. I mean, I look at Fullcast and it's like, I know exactly what Fullcast does, where some of these other people are like, ask it a question. And I'm like, no.
Well, that's good to know, Andy. I appreciate that very much. All right. This one was a very fascinating slide for me. Again, very intuitive, but it's nice to know that we're not vibe coding financial platforms away right now. I think that people do not trust AI with the money. The surprise for me on this was that very few people give AI full trust in anything, really. And I do believe that that is the right way to do this. From my perspective, AI agents should be managed by a human, at least at this stage of the game. And so it's nice to know that the market seems to agree with that. Andy, why don't you go first? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think somebody, I think Manny Medina said it really well, which was it, a lot of stuff will be automated and you won't see it anymore. But if you're touching money flows, like that's where you need to trust your AI. It's also interestingly like that's the stuff that's never going to get automated away, right? Like I will always need to pay commissions. If commissions are wrong, people get fired, people quit.
Yep. Yep.
It's a major problem, and I can't have stuff making stuff up. I think I can use AI around the edges to do it, but I need somebody that's really making sure that that's super accurate. So I would
Mhm.
not want people to be vibe coding that. I think if I look at the one above it, the customer side, That's the one where Noah's actually leading both CS and RevOps, and I'm seeing the most high likelihood of people automating is like CS processes. We've
Mhm.
already seen it happen with support. I think CSM will get automated fairly quickly as well too.
Mm.
So I do generally trust people with that stuff. That being said, I heard of a company which their support system, and they were not Brex, said somebody asked, how can I get help? And talk to a person, it said email support@brex.com. And this company was not Brex. Right. And so you make a mistake like that, that's going to look really, really badly on you.
Yeah, completely agree. Noah, thoughts on this?
Nothing more to add. This is a statement. It's,
Yeah, sure is.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay, this one is very interesting too. So this was you can select a whole bunch of these different things that's holding you back from greater AI adoption. So what's holding teams back is organizational. It's strategy, coordination, and governance. That one was the highest cited. The lowest cited alongside integration and productionization. Whoa, that's a big word. Product productionizing is at number 7% cost and budget. So I was very surprised that the strategy coordination governance was so high and the cost and budget was so low. Noah, do you want to go first? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm going through this right now with my organization, and I think the biggest challenge is not necessarily getting the budget to do the right thing. It's understanding where do you really want to focus, because historically, when you looked at, and I'll take the go-to-market tech stack as an example, there were set types of solutions that did very fixed things, and it was a simpler decision as to whether or not you wanted to go buy that capability. But now, because there's so much in between, and it almost comes back to the art of the possible, that it does take a moment to think back and say, do we need to rethink how we're doing this? Because for
Mhm.
a decade, everyone was just rinse and repeat with the same technology, the same processes. And so this is an opportunity for everybody to take a step back and say, are we even thinking about this the same way? I mean, Andy's spot on in customer success, and particularly on the scaled side. Are there ways to service the customer better, to provide more value that's not so human heavy? And so this is the time when it takes a moment to step back and think through it. And then if you are going to do it, what are the implications of that change? Because you might be doing something that you've never done before, the organization hasn't done, or there aren't best practices, which is why governance is really important to wrap in there. So it is taking a moment to have people come back and say, oh, what is this? And Andy said it on a couple of slides earlier. The better that, if vendors are, particularly AI vendors that can do things that maybe traditional vendors weren't able to provide, that they understand that this is a moment when people need to take a step back and think through it. So the more that you can vocalize and be crisp and clear on where organizations can leverage your expertise and your services, the more you're going to be able to help them get over that hurdle.
It's very interesting. I really like that. You mentioned something about like the business structure and organization. And from my perspective, again, my academic background is in organizational theory and behavior and structure. And so, the classic book by Max Weber, bureaucracy is about bureaucracy is very much silos, departmental budgets. Things back then in the Industrial Revolution were supposed to be that way. Now that we're a much more integrated, digitally transformed ecosystem, those silos are no longer helpful. And you see that all the time, that silos now become like, really been a vilified term because it's not helpful for pretty much anyone anymore in terms of business structure. So if you're an organization that is still trying to maintain like the old way of doing things and have not really digitally transformed, you're going to have a really hard time using AI because you're not going to be able to have that coordinated strategy, and you will have the siloed sprawl. It will not give you a unified data layer in order to run your business on. Andy, anything else you want to say about this before we move on?
I'll pick just one to focus on the top right, the time bandwidth one. a lot of people like AI's here, let me cut 10% of the entire team, right? Like, but don't cut the people that you need to drive the efficiency with, right? And so I talk to so many people, so many CROs and CEOs, which is like, I'm not getting AI transformation out of my RevOps team. And I ask them, well, do you realize that they have a ton of run the business stuff? They still need to generate commissions. They still need to cut territories. They still need to do all this stuff. And like you've also asked them to do this. I made this mistake at Carta, right? Like we brought in Clay, I gave it to a person that was overloaded, and we didn't move forward as much on it. And so I think I always think about what's the run the business work that you need to do. That's not going to drop away. So if I were actually to do this, I would say, great, I'm going to give you one extra headcount, but that person needs to get payback back by making other people and reps efficient. And so I do
Mhm.
see a lot of naivete, which is senior level people will just cut like the whole company versus like literally you're cutting the people that you want to drive the change.
Yeah, that is such a good comment on terms of even headcount and how we think about like revenue per employee and things like that. Gotta make sure that you have the resources to operationalize this.
Yeah.
All right,
This
this
one's a fun one.
is a
Yeah.
fun one. Okay, Andy, why don't you go ahead and introduce this one? I like the way that you structured this slide.
Yeah, I mean, at a fundamental level, buy versus build is not the same eval for every single tool. There's a lot of things, which I think, Amy, on the next couple slides, you've got a couple on like how we're all approaching and what the decision framework, but this kind of calls it in, which is people are, whether they have a framework or not, they're clearly making decisions that some tools they are never going to build, like a CRM, and some tools they will most likely build, like forecasting.
Mhm.
I think the one that caused the most debate on a post I had was commissions. There were a lot of people being like, I can't believe somebody over X in revenue would ever build a commissions tool. And I was like, yeah, I kind of agree with you, but there are people that are trying to do it.
Yeah, I think so too. And with this caveat of, they're going to try to do it, but then again, how much is it going to cost? How many months is it going to take? And are they going to be successful with a sophisticated methodology behind how they are analyzing the data? When you think about it from, again, an academic perspective, you've got your research questions, you've got your data collection, you've got your data analysis, you've got your discussion points, and it really depends on the framework that you use in that analysis piece, as well as how you're collecting the data to make sure that when you're building something, it's going to give you the results that you want. We've talked about that at length. Noah, anything else you want to say about this particular slide?
There's no extra credit for building something yourself.
Ooh.
I think the build versus buy, it's the right question, but at the end of the day, it's where do I create competitive advantage,
Mhm.
and avoid building out technical debt. And so I think there's some things that work well and some areas that don't, and I would focus on the things that are the most important to you. And if for some reason you can't find a really good commissions tool out there to support you, then maybe that is your most important thing that you need to drive. But I'm not sure building a commissions tool is going to create that competitive advantage.
If you are looking for a good commissions tool, just call me. We got one.
Yeah.
There it is. Numbers on the screen.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one vulnerable question about this build versus buy. My question is, there is a movement, a perceived movement in RevOps that if the team can build it themselves, then they are more likely to have job security. They're more likely to own the operation, and they'll prevent themselves from being there, will prevent their job from being taken away by AI. There's also the other side where they're like, okay, if you try to build something and it doesn't work out for you, you're spending a crap ton of time. Well, could I say crap ton on a webinar? You're spending a ton
You
of
can, Amy.
time. You're spending a ton of time
Oh,
and and resources, and you're ultimately kind of wasting the business's resources. So where do you guys fall on that? Does it when a RevOps leader is thinking about their own job security and they think about the build versus buy decision, what should they be thinking about?
I mean, we talked about this in a huddle I had with Whispered RevOps leaders this morning, actually.
Mm.
When you're building a product release process,
Mm.
right? Whether if you decide to build a commission tool, you've effectively said, no, we both have our normal product, but then we also now have a product process here. But if you don't
Mhm.
have documentation, like you're just doing it wrong. And so I guess to the question you have, I don't know anyone that's thinking about job security in this market, because companies are, if you lose product market fit, if growth slows, if a new leader changes, those are all other reasons that you could lose your job. And I feel like you need to do the best thing. I think what is falling down when you build is documentation and process.
Mhm.
And so when that person leaves or gets terminated, and I just talked to somebody that got terminated at a big company in like a 30% riff, there's no documentation. Stuff will break. And so, but I don't think I haven't talked to a single leader yet that's thinking about their job security and making a build versus buy decision off of that.
Very interesting. How about you, Noah? Anything there?
Yeah, I think there's a common thread, particularly around a lot of the ops leaders that have been doing this for a little while, is that I think every single one of them could get in and build a model from scratch, could go build a pipeline model, a capacity model. And it's that ability to jump into the weeds and really understand how things are working and why things are working is what's made them successful. Not that you need to do it on a daily basis, and God knows you don't want me building a model anymore, but to be able to understand how that works and why it works the way it does, somewhat similar to how you think about building with AI, is that if you're going in blind and you don't understand the fundamentals of why it's working the way it is, then you're going to be missing out and something's going to happen and you're not going to be able to adjust and it's going to go to somebody else that can. So,
Mm.
from that perspective, I don't know that everybody needs to be able to be coding and building, but you do need to understand the fundamentals. You do need to be able to understand how it works and why it works. Otherwise, I'm not sure what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. For those people who are interested in kind of a framework for building versus buying, this one, Andy introduced me to Kyle's presentation. I really liked it and put this one slide in there. Um, Stability and uptime is a factor. Customization is a factor. ROI on engineering is a factor. Owning the intelligence is also a factor. And finally, is a competitive advantage. Does it give you a real edge? So number one, does this have to be up and running 100% of the time? Number two, because I mean, we all know, like, if we're being honest, we've all built stuff on LLMs and it doesn't work the next day, right? Just being honest. So if it needs to be up 24/7, you need to have that governance, you know, making sure everything is always staying up. You've got to have the people who are on it all the time. Number two, do you really get something new from building? Or like you guys were saying earlier in the webinar, a lot of people are building the same things. Number three, what's the technical cost versus the business value? Number four, does this give you the intelligence you want to use across other surfaces? Number five, competitive advantage. Does it really give you a real edge? And one thing that I think is fascinating was Sequoia just sent out a brief that was very, very similar to this, that from their perspective, agents now own intelligence and humans now own judgment. And I like to think of it that way in terms of what should I build? What should I buy? What is an AI going to do for me? And what do I need to do myself? So I want to end on this slide and just give both of you guys a chance to give some final thoughts. Andy, do you want to go first? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Amy, I'll use the word you used earlier. Kyle knows his crap. I've loved this framework since I first saw it. I've tweaked it slightly in my mind, but I continue to refer back to it. I think the one thing I add to this is speed of execution is something that matters a lot in this space. And so, speed for buying is how fast can I bring it in, procure it, and get security to sign off and get it implemented. Speed for building is how fast can I get it up and working. And then there's all these other things. And so that's kind of another dimension that I've added to. And it doesn't necessarily push you towards one or the other, but I think it's something you need to think
And
about.
maybe it's like that layer on top. How fast can you go?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. When we publish our joint ebook, I've been thinking about a slight tweak to Kyle's, but I love it. I think the point Noah made earlier on was around customization is really important. Like, if you're not going to get any competitive advantage out of it, do you really want to build a product release process and a product development process around something that is non-competitive to you? I mean, getting commissions right is important, but like getting it nuanced to you versus getting it like getting a vendor to get that, like I think I would not build anything where I can't get a competitive advantage.
100%. I love that. Noah?
Yeah. I'll end with the thought that I probably over index on the expertise factor, which is, all these projects will compound differently over time. And for me is, am I going to benefit from a vendor's expertise and all of their customers' expertise and their experience working across all those different frameworks? Am I going to benefit from that by partnering with a vendor? Or is
Mm.
this an expertise that I really want to own myself and maintain, that I really need to understand? And that goes back to that infrastructure. So, and fundamentally, I'll go out and buy that infrastructure because that's something that's tried and true, and there's a best practice there. But the intelligence, 100%, that's something that you need to understand where and how your organization ticks a little bit differently, and what does that mean for all the decisions that you'll then make based on that information and that intelligence. So for me, it's the expertise if I have it, or if I really want to leverage a partner to help provide it.
I really love that. And I feel like we can't underestimate the value of those partners who've been through it before, who are there to offer suggestions and advice so we can be more successful earlier. So I really appreciate your time on this, and it's really exciting to see how well you guys yourselves have adopted AI and how we can, help other people to learn it also and to have that framework for guidance. Um, I wanted to just give you guys a chance also to talk a little bit about Go-to-Market Council. Can you tell us a little bit more about Go-to-Market Council, what it does, who could participate in it? I think what you guys are building is really fascinating and very much needed in the marketplace.
Noah, you want to start?
Sure. So the Go-to-Market Council is an organization that we started about a decade ago for senior leaders to create a community because we're all going through various experiences, a lot of similarities, and so it was an opportunity for us to create a network. So talking about vendors, talking about career aspirations, understanding the various trends that are happening. As ops leaders, you oftentimes have to be a mile wide and just a couple inches deep on many different things. And so our ability to stay close to what's happening is paramount to not only our success, but the value that we drive back to the business. And so what we started doing is it started with just a handful of folks back in the day, and then it slowly grew and grew. And then as AI emerged and really transformed the whole go-to-market motion, a lot of other folks and time. I mean, this is big. We've been doing this for a while. The time has evolved, and
Yeah.
there's a lot more of these leaders out there. In fact, some of the folks that were analysts back in the day with us are now leading their own teams, and so that network has grown, and we have roughly about 140 leaders. All have made a material impact at some sizable companies, and really are leaning in and wanting to be thought leaders. And so for us, it's helping fill the gap or the void that is out there between what maybe the board members want organizations to do, and then operationally how you can actually drive those changes and drive those innovations. And so what we hope to do is we hope to help cultivate, and not just between Andy and I, it's we have a great group of members that are collaborating and are driving this thought leadership across the industry. So really excited that this came together, and real thankful for the crew that we have.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
and thank you,
absolutely.
Amy, for the partnership on this thing. I think not everyone can join. We're focused. We found the value of creating a peer group for people. But if you're affiliated with Fullcast and a top RevOps person, like drop us a note. But everyone can follow. I think what we really do is we see the change that's happening. We love collaborating with innovative vendors like Fullcast to understand the change that's happening. We do a lot on our podcast as well too, and then we try to share that change out. And I think what we care most about is that people don't make stupid decisions with their GTM transformation.
That is very well said and a perfect way to end. The theme of this show is don't make stupid decisions, right? Just kidding. Thank you so much, you guys. I really appreciate your time. It's so exciting to see the results of this study, and we'll get this out to everybody that's interested. Thank you all of you who have joined us on the webinar, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.